Handsome Fool, aka Randy Kavanaugh from the Armor Garage, and this is episode 4 of Pep vs. Print, the show where we build 2 identical props, one using 3D printing and one using pepakura. The last episode, on the Pep side, we finished prepping our templates that we're going to use for tracing onto the foam, and on the 3D print side, we started cleaning up some of our first 3D prints. In today's episode, we're going to trace out our templates onto the foam, and on the 3D printing side, we're going to start gluing together some of our parts. Again, if you'd like any more information or additional videos on any of the concepts I cover in today's episode, please leave me a message in the comments section and I can go over those concepts in a future video. Alright, let's dive right into it.
Okay, so the tools we'll be using to do our pepakura work in today's episode are a pair of scissors, an X-Acto knife, our cutting mats, and then a couple of pens to cycle between when we're tracing out the foam. I like to use a pen when I'm tracing on the foam. You can really use whatever you have on hand, but I find that with a pen you get much finer lines and it makes for cleaner, more accurate cuts when you're cutting out the parts. Another thing to consider, if you use something like a Sharpie instead of a pen, is that the Sharpie tends to transfer onto whatever you're wearing. If you're tracing out all your templates on the floor, which is usually what I'll do, I've wrecked a couple pair of pants doing this with a red Sharpie, and you wind up with red Sharpie all over your pants. The reason I like to keep a few pens on hand is that as I'm tracing out the parts, the foam tends to dry out the pens. So if you have a couple on hand and you just cycle between them as they dry out, by the time the next one dries out, you're always good to go and you always got a pen that works. Or if you're anything like me, you'll lose half a dozen pens anyways while you're working, so it's good to have a couple backups. Okay, so I've cut out a few squares of foam beforehand that'll fit on my work table here to better demo tracing through the parts. Normally when I do a build, I just lay out the whole roll of foam on the floor and I just start working my way from one side of the foam mat to the other, tracing out as many pieces as close together as I can so that I reduce waste. I also like to trace out all the templates first before I start cutting any of them out, but again, that's more or less just a personal preference. There's no real reasoning behind it. Okay, we're ready to start tracing out some parts. I just hold down the template on the foam and trace them out. I've seen some people use pins or tape them down. I've just never found that was really necessary, but if you're following along, do whatever you feel comfortable with. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can always correct things with filler and sanding. Make sure that I didn't miss any areas there. Okay, so I'm just going to keep working my way through here. After part's traced, what I do is I mark it with that ID that we wrote on all the pieces to make it easier to figure out what piece it is, and just makes it easier to build. Now if you remember, when we were arranging the parts, we only kept one half of the symmetrical pieces. So that's like the pieces that were the same on both halves of the mask. So if this was one of the pieces, which it is, what we need to do is flip it over and trace it again. Perfect. Now again, I'm going to write the part ID on it, but to differentiate that this was a mirrored piece, all I do is I just put a little asterisk next to the part ID, and then I know quickly at a glance which pieces belong to which half. Now, another thing is anywhere there's a fold line on the part, we want to mark that off so that we can undercut it and get a nice crease when we're actually building the piece. That'll make more sense later, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and quickly do that. What I do when I'm doing this is I just look at the fold line and I just mark a little divot on either side of the fold line, and then just use the part like a straight edge to quickly draw a line across. Like I've said time and time again, it doesn't have to be perfect, you know. Just have fun with it. This can be a little tricky with the mirrored parts, because if you flip it over, obviously you can't see where the fold lines are. So what I do is I just kind of mark it, flip it over, give a little mark, flip it over, give a little mark. Because really all you need to know is where the fold lines start and end. Also, if you're comfortable drawing a straight line, just draw it straight across. You don't always have to mess around with a straight edge. Okay, so that's the first part done of many. So I'm just gonna continue working through tracing out all these parts. Yeah, right there. Happy little Stormtrooper mouth lives right there. Another one bites the dust. Another one bites, and another one bites. Another one bites the dust. If you're wondering, yeah, this is the most tedious, boring part of building one of these things. So again, I try to really pack these parts as tight as I can. Try to waste the least amount of foam that I possibly can. Sometimes it's hard once you get further along in the build and pieces really don't fit, but yeah. do what you can. You do start to get into a groove, though, after a little while. You know, you get into your spots. Another problem, actually, with Sharpie that I ran into on Bowser is that the Sharpie tends to bleed through the paint as well, which can be a real problem. Um, it wasn't so bad with Bowser because it didn't really start bleeding through until a couple weeks afterwards, but it sucks now because if I want to wear him again, I have to repaint him and still probably show through. Only real solution is probably to sand it down to get rid of those lines. Ah, look at that. Perfect fit. Something really satisfying when you find a little spare section of that foam and piece just fits in there perfectly. It's the little things in life. Okay, so the supplies we're going to need for working on the 3D print are some super glue gel to glue the pieces together, some duct tape to hold them while we're gluing, and some wood filler to fill in the seams. I like to use either super glue gel or Gorilla Glue when I'm gluing my 3D printed parts together. They both tend to work really well. I chose to go with the super glue just because it tends to be a little less messy. The Gorilla Glue creates a fantastic bond, but it expands as it dries. So if you're not careful, you can wind up with a big mess at your seams, which requires a little bit of cutting and sanding and cleanup to remove the mess. Okay, let's grab our part here. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is, you can see inside I've just kind of taped all the parts together. So I'm just going to remove that tape first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a little bit of glue to the outside here, just along the edge. And then I'm going to use the duct tape to hold the two pieces together while it dries. You can also use clamps if you'd like, but I find that the tape works just as well, and I have it on hand, so let's go ahead and do that now. With the super glue, a little bit really goes a long way. You don't need a lot. I'm just going to wipe that along, make sure it's totally covered. And we're just going to line up those seams, get it as close as we can. Okay, so we'll just leave that to set up, and then we'll take a look once the glue is dry. Okay, so once the glue is dried, the next step, or at least what I like to do, is to create an even better bond between the two parts. I take my Dremel with this round Dremel bit on it, and while it's going, I just kind of work it back and forth to essentially friction weld these two pieces together into a single piece of plastic. So I'll demonstrate that now. So if you can see in there, what that does is it essentially melts the plastic together and creates a fantastic weld and makes the piece really strong.
Alright, I think that about wraps it up for today's episode. Our next episode is going to be dedicated completely to PEP. What we're going to do is cut out some of those parts and start gluing and shaping them together so that we can get caught up to where we are with our 3D print. Now, if you like this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button at the end. And if you want to check out some of my other projects, check out my Facebook page at www.facebook.com/thearmorgarage. Thanks for watching.